Hi, my name is Todd Wall, and welcome to Communication Breakthrough, where we believe that intentional communication will lead to the breakthrough that you're looking for in both your business and your life. As you lead your business, as you lead your life, as you have a team around you, you can only go as far as your team has the morale to go. Every business deals with difficulties. Every business has challenges. One of the major challenges we face as business leaders and owners is the morale of our team, the morale and the company culture that we are creating. The culture that we create will dictate how energized and excited our team actually is. Nobody wants to look around the room and see a group of team members that are bored, that are just clock in, clock out, just like zombies walking through. That's what we're trying to avoid. That comes down to the connection that you as the leader has created with your team, and ultimately that the purpose that team has. And I would even take it one step further, just like Simon Sinek says, start with your why. I always say, what is the cause that we're fighting for? What is the cause that your team is fighting for and moving towards? If your business is just creating widgets and selling widgets like a factory, there's no cause that they're fighting for. Emotion is connected to that purpose that you give your team members. And that comes to creating the connection you have with them individually and the direction that you're moving as a company. Join us today with our panel of experts as we say, if you do this, then this will occur. If you start doing this, your company culture will start doing this. You can radically change the output of your business by changing the output of your company culture. As you change your company culture, you will impact the morale of the individuals. As you impact the morale of the individuals, you're going to impact both the people on your team and then ultimately the customers you're trying to create an impact with. Let's unlock this together. Join us on this journey in this episode as we figure out how to unravel this morale question, how to unravel and create a culture that creates excitement, that creates a dynamic where your team is pursuing a cause and not just building a widget to sell. Let's do this together. Join us. Stay with us after the break. Here we go. All right, everybody, welcome back. I cannot wait to get into this topic because as a business owner, business leader, entrepreneur, whichever level you're on, you as the visionary leader, you expect the team that you've hired to be pulling their weight to the same degree and motivation that you are. The problem is that it doesn't always happen, especially if the morale of the company begins to slide downwards and there's a chain reaction that begins to play. My first guest today that I want to begin discussing this with is a good friend, Ken Jacobs, with Jacobs Consulting and Executive Coaching. And let me bring him on now. Ken, how are you doing today?
Good to be here. Thank you so much, Todd.
Yeah, Ken, I can't wait to get your perspective on this, not only from your years of PR in the PR world, but just, big time New York business that you've been doing for years, years and years.
I don't know about that.
But let's talk about, you've in your executive coaching and consulting, you've seen so many varieties of different companies at different stages. And they typically, they'll call that consultant in when, it's like a wrestling, they're going to tag the next guy in because morale is down, because the results aren't down. So what is this chain reaction? Let's talk, how have you seen this play out? This negative or poor morale within a company?
Well, something you said in the beginning there about something about, how owners want the employees to act as if they're a part owner. It's like, well, why should they? Are you making them a part owner? Are you giving them stock? I mean, companies that have a little bit of shared ownership or equity or what, they do better. So that's something there. But why would you expect them to act as an owner if they're not? That's just lunacy. This is where I find a nice way to tell my client, are you out of your mind? Because that's just not going to happen.
Right. And so it often does begin with just unrealistic expectations. And then that begins the process. Well, they're not performing at the level where they're not as motivated as I am. And then the negative talk begins.
Yeah.
Then it's the finger pointing where, why didn't you? Why haven't you? And, the negative nonverbals that the CEO or the leader can give, just, they did this again. And it erodes confidence. I mean, so let's talk through that downward slide first, and then let's figure out how we can improve it.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because, if a CEO brought me in that situation as a consultant, I think my response would be, well, let's start with some coaching. And they'd say, oh, who on my team needs coaching? It's you. You need some coaching because you've got to be the kind of leader that people want to follow. And the eye roll and the, and why aren't they? And the finger pointing. Who wants to follow a leader like that? That's just, I think, unrealistic. And I think what's important to remember, we are living in an era of employee disengagement. The Gallup Global Study, that's a mouthful, on workplace came out, I think at the end of 23, give or take. And it showed something like the levels of disengagement globally are 65 to 70%. So let's say, oh, well, that's other countries. That's not my, and that's other companies. That's not me. But even if your level of disengagement of your teams is 50%, you're not getting anything done. I mean, are you surprised? Morale is what it is. So I think everything we do as leaders, we have to bear in mind, we are in an era of disengagement and the worlds of our employees, whatever fields we're in, PR agencies, which are the ones that I serve or any other, it's such a different world for them. We need to start with understanding what it's like to be someone in your organization. And then I would look very seriously at what are the causes of any disengagement, and optimistically, how do I change that? But the era of the CEO who says, the whippings and the lashings are going to continue until morale improves. That could be a problem. That really could be. I'm going to put it on a T-shirt, but that could be.
Yeah, and some of that level of leadership has even led to this new Gen Z generations coming in with innovating communication, but they've also got this mindset of, oh, it's whatever. I'm going to act like I'm not engaged. I'm trying, but I don't want anybody to feel like I'm trying. That really goes into that disengagement that you talked about.
Well, I think we've been talking about generations. I mean, I'm old enough that we were talking about, oh my Lord, how do you manage millennials? And oh my, Gen X and not Gen X and Gen Y and now Gen Z. I think what's really important, if you've got a workforce of Gen Z or Gen Y, you've got to understand them. You've got to understand how they were raised. You've got to understand the culture. You've got to understand how different life is for each generation. I know I see certain generations speaking with some disdain about the generations in their workforce. But if you disdain them, why would they follow you? So instead, start to understand them. Well, we have to be careful, about generalizations, but
Mhm.
there are certain things that are true for many of them. And so if you want them to follow you, and if they're not following you, you're not a leader, right? So if you want them to follow you, understand what's important to them and see what you can deliver. And related to that is the idea that maybe they're not following you. They're coming in, they're doing the work, it's transactional. They're not following you. They'll leave the minute they get a better offer. Right.
Yeah.
So that's risky. So we don't want it to be transactional. In fact, I think if you can become a better leader, even a great leader, that can become transformative. It's transformative for them. It's transformative for your organization and it's
Absolutely.
transformative for you. And,
Mm.
I've worked with clients and I say, when you turn around, what do you see? Do you see employees who think of themselves as team members and who really are willing to follow you off that proverbial cliff is what you want. That is what you want, I believe.
Absolutely. So engagement, I think you've nailed that. That's the first signal that we're looking for in this poor morale. Are there any other signals beyond disengagement?
Well, I think you mentioned something about the negative talk that's out there, and it might be on Slack. It depends, of course. Are you all in person or are you virtual or hybrid? But, employees today share a lot more than I shared when I was starting in the business of public relations. They're very willing to share what they're unhappy about. It's not hard. It's not hard to learn. So the question is, are you asking enough? Not what are you unhappy about, but what are you happy about? What would make you happier? What else do you need from us to feel engaged? What
Mhm.
else do you see the career vision for you? Do you see the next steps and the steps after that? So, you know,
So you're speaking of the intentionality of asking. So the flip side was, I guess, the silence, in disengagement, the silence of people sharing their opinions. If you're in a project and does anybody have any input, and you just get crickets.
oh, that tells you something because everyone has input. If they're not sharing it with you, they're sharing it among themselves. And
Yeah.
that's not necessarily productive. So if you're finding that, then there's some work. There's some work
I've seen
to be
some
done.
environments where, like, let's say there's a company announcement, and they'll announce it in the big group or the department, and the questions are very limited. But then I would check back in with the manager, and they said, "Oh, we had a lot of conversations, really transparent conversations afterwards." I think that speaks to it a lot too. Do they feel the safety to speak up?
Yeah.
Um,
I think we accept most of them won't. And the reality is people stay with companies or leave companies, sometimes if they're inspired by the CEO, but so much of it is about their manager right above them. And so I would say I would not necessarily be concerned that they're not bringing up in a public forum. What's most important, I think, is that the manager, that in fact, the CEO even says, if you have any issues or concerns about this, please reach out to me and you may want to speak to your manager because they're probably not going to speak to the CEO, but you
right.
want to encourage them to speak to the manager. And
Absolutely.
you've got to have some agreement in advance. What's the manager going to say? But,
Or on the flip side, are you going to get apathy as a result? Which is a side effect of that disengagement.
yeah,
Of,
yeah.
you
Let,
know,
let,
like
let, let's
like the
hope
Gen
not.
Z saying whatever. Do they really mean whatever, or are they just saying that
Oh,
as, because I don't think
whatever
they
can
actually mean it.
mean, yeah, whatever can mean so many things. And if you hear whatever, and this is why you've got to do more face to face or Zoom or Teams or whatever you use, because the tone behind whatever and the body language and the
Yeah.
eyes, that will tell you what whatever means, whether it means it's fine either way, I don't care, or oh, this is just some corporate BS and, you know, whatever, there's an eye roll involved. That tells you. That's,
Hey,
and
Ken.
that's why I think it is so important. If I could reiterate a point, it
Yeah.
is so important to have more, as much in person as possible, as far
Mhm.
as one-on-ones, followed by Zoom, at worst phone. But these interactions, nothing against Slack, but these kind of interactions on Slack or Team,
Right. Well,
there's
just
no content.
dopamine levels are completely
Yeah.
different. So, hey, Ken, I'll tell you what, let's go to the commercial break, but afterwards, let's jump into how do we improve. So we've gone down, talked about the engagement and the apathy and the lack of communication. Let's talk about how can we take this thing back up the slope, push the boulder up the hill, and improve morale. So,
Good.
all right, everybody, right after this, stick with us. We'll be right back with Ken. Stick with us. All right, everybody, welcome back. I can't wait to get into this conversation with Ken again because, hey, when morale goes down, the company can go down because they get disengaged, they get apathetic. Communication goes down to nothing. And like Ken said in our first segment, they have an opinion. So if they're not vocalizing it, something is wrong. So, Ken, man, let's jump straight into this because we took this train down to the abyss of disengagement, apathy, and no communication. Let's help these business owners get back up the train because a leader needs to know they need a team that's engaged. Yeah, they're never going to be as engaged as the visionary leader, the owner, the entrepreneur. But man, if they can get to 60 or 70% of that engagement, this is going to be a dynamite team. So let's go equal. Let's play the equal and opposite game for a little bit.
Sure.
You said the first side effect is this even global disengagement. So if things are moving away, how do we bring the team back together? What do you suggest?
Yeah. Well, I think the good news is there are always things a leader and the people under them can do to improve this. So number one, when is the last time you did a values check? What matters to the people in your organization? And this changes with a lot of generations. My generation, a proud mid-baby boomer, was all about, let me at it, let me do it, just pay me well, give me a lot of autonomy. With every other generation, it's slightly different. So we need to understand what's important to them. For example, I loved working with the people I work with, but it wasn't mission one for me, right? So, but for the following generations, that sense of community, the community at work, even if it's virtual, is very, very important. So you need to understand what drives them. What's, again, as a group and to the degree you can individually, and are we giving them what we need in the areas that are important? And for today's gen, it's not just money. It's not just money at all.
How do you get that answer? I mean, you can send a survey, but how do you really get a true, authentic answer on what really drives them?
I think it's a combination of understanding the generation through research, but that's the least of it. That's just table stakes. Next is your one-on-ones from them to their managers. And you do need, I think, autonomous surveys because there's a level of feedback you might get that, in a one-on-one, you may not get, right? If someone's talking to their manager and what's the problems here, right? What could make it better? And if the problem is management, they're not going to tell their manager. They're not going to, there's only so much value. And you could, the manager can say, I have an open door policy and an open door approach and all that great stuff. But the fact is, they're not going to necessarily be honest with the person responsible for their promotions and their salary increases and their bonus. They just may not be honest about that. So you've got to have a confidential way to let people not just blow off steam, but to share how they're really feeling. That's one idea.
So where do you stand on surveys being an anonymous survey versus putting your name on there? And by the way, if anybody needs to do a survey, you can just do it simply through Google. There's
Google Survey Monkey
Yeah.
must be anonymous, must be anonymous, must be anonymous. You know,
just so they feel the freedom and the safety to be able to really voice that concern.
Well, even stronger, they're not going to tell you their truths if there's the possibility of any kind of repercussion. And if your name's attached, there's the policy of repercussion. So if you want the real skinny, the real truth, you got to let them do it anonymously. So I think that's part of it. Frequent one-on-ones are part of it.
Yeah.
I think the other thing related to that, it's not just letting off steam. It's not just letting people complain. You know, one thing I did at a few firms where I worked, where we were sort of the top level of leadership, but then as we found the things that people wanted done better, we created a real working committee, emphasis on working, on solving these problems, led by people at all levels, starting with the level below us, because we wanted them to understand you may not be able to fix everything. Sometimes it costs a lot of money and we may not have that, right? Very easy to say, oh, you know, we want this and an indoor swimming pool and free spa. Yeah, that's great. But, you know, so it teaches them how to prioritize. It teaches them how to solve problems. So make them part of the solution
process. So you make sure they're heard, but they have a chance to vocalize, and then show a way that reflects that you've actually heard what they're saying by engaging them in the decision-making process as one of those possibilities.
Yeah. Well, certainly it's the suggestion process. If you think about it, leadership is still going to decide maybe what we can and can't do, what we
budget
can
constraints.
Afford. Now, I would tell you as a leader, if this group, which might be a generation or 2 or 3 younger than you, comes up with some things and you're thinking, well, why does that matter? You know, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to you. Do it. Offer it. They're telling you it matters to them. Offer it to them, especially if it's somewhat affordable. But, you know, and even as I'm saying this, and we're talking about what's affordable and what's expensive and all this stuff, what is the cost of a disengaged workforce?
How much does it cost to replace somebody? And the law, I mean, it goes on and on.
Yeah. Yeah. Most companies can afford to do more. It depends on what the priorities are. But to your point, if enough people leave, even just replacing one person, I've heard statistics that the replacement cost is 1/2 to double their salary.
Yes.
1/2 to double their salary.
Mm-hmm. So you got training, you've got loss of production. There's a myriad of different things. Would you say, to boil it down, it's really, you can create the re-engagement by really showing you value people, their perspective, and you really want to hear what they have to say.
Well, that's at the top of the list, right?
Yeah.
If you want me to be engaged, show you value me. You value my contributions. You value my performance. You value my opinion. I mean, I think that might be step 1. I wish I had thought about that 2 minutes ago.
How else can we help them re-engage and create?
You know, I think part of it is, you know, being in touch with them on their vision for their careers. And, how can I forget this? What is their vision for the organization? You know, not all, but many of the people in your organization at even low levels have a vision for what they want that organization to be, have a vision for their role in it. And I always say, well, what is vision? Well, vision is, you know, what comes after what comes next. Let's engage them in that process. You know, followers, team members follow people with a vision. That's what galvanizes people. But if you really want to galvanize people, and this takes some courage, you put your vision out there and you ask them to contribute to it. So it goes from my vision to our vision. It takes courage, but boy, is that galvanizing.
That's huge. That's
and
that's
setting
bravery.
ambitious goals galvanizes a team. Can I attribute some of that to Kim Sample? She, like me, was a PR person for many years. She has been for quite a few years the president of the PR Council. It used to be the Council of PR Firms, but for a few years it's been the PR Council. But that notion of encouraging them to contribute to the vision and that notion of having ambitious goals, that really galvanizes the team. Those are some things she shared with me years ago. And Kim Sample is the gift that keeps on giving.
My teenager comes home from school every day, just like, oh, this was just it was just so boring. It was boring. What'd you do today? Nothing. It was boring. I think that speaks to the ambitious goals. Are you being challenged?
Yeah.
And that becomes a driver in itself.
So my kids are 37 and 32. So let me share advice I wish someone had told me then when they were teens, which is, and I think part of that ennui and eye roll is part of being a teen and finding one's role in the world. But I think to change the conversation from what happened today to what's the best thing that happened today? What's one good thing that happened today? That's a little bit of neuroscience that forces them to think about, was there one good thing? Another thing I've heard you can do even earlier, like with preteens and earlier, in an era, unfortunately, of bullying and some other things that aren't so nice in school, just to say, what's a kind thing you did for someone today?
And what if, as managers, we took on those same questions?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Ken, this is so powerful. I absolutely love this conversation of just what's led to this wave of disengagement, but we can re-engage by treating people as people, showing that they're heard, finding ways to involve them in it, and then giving goals that they need to aspire to, that drives them so they can feel that sense of greatness. So Ken,
can I give you one other point, because you've just inspired me? Many managers and leaders think about, well, I'm going to treat them the way I wanted to be treated or the way I want to be treated. Let's flip that on its head. Treat each one the way they want to be treated, because it might be very different for you, for them versus for you, either because of generation or just because they're different people. So to the degree you can individualize all this, you will get the benefit.
Ken, this is absolutely powerful. I mean, all of your consulting and coaching, executive coaching, goes towards breakthrough. And this is the type of thing that leads to breakthroughs in companies. Thank you for sharing your wealth. And thank you so much for sharing your time. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, stick with us. We have another expert right after this commercial break. We have to solve this problem of poor morale, of disengagement, and bringing the team back together. Stick with us. All right, welcome back, everybody. Hey, Ken provided us some fantastic information. We went down the hill into the problem, and then we went right back up the hill. And how do you reconnect and rebuild this poor morale? Because if the team has a poor morale and poor culture, I mean, the whole production of everything is going to go down. Your effectiveness is going to go down. And if you're ineffective as a company, your profit is going to go down. Ultimately, that's what our main concern is. So I brought in another guest, Justin Prust, who one of the things I love about his perspective is, by training, he is an economist. And yet in his consulting business, he really focuses on how to bring the potential out of your team and really begin to help them bloom again. So he's going to offer us some great insight into that. So let me bring Justin in now. Justin, how are you doing today?
Doing fantastic, Todd. How about you?
Absolutely. I always love your perspective, and you weighed in on our goals and objectives episode, previously. And so I can't wait to get your perspective on poor morale and just this company culture that almost begins to get toxic. And anything that is toxic is sick. Anything that is sick is on the process of dying. And so we don't want our babies, our companies, to be dying and going down. We want profit. We want happiness. So, Justin, you've had to have dealt with these types of situations with a lot of the consultancy that you've done previously. So let's talk about this going down the hill process. What leads to this poor morale and bad company culture?
Absolutely. And it's funny because we're going to discuss this in a very short period of time. So this is just a quick glimpse because this is one of those things you can talk about forever. But what I would say here is there's three main things that really go into this. The first is lack of communication, because it's very, very hard for a lot of people to understand what's going on because they feel disconnected. And all of a sudden something changes and it's not communicated effectively. And then you get bitter, or they get bitter, and it trickles and it percolates. I love to use that word because it's just it's a really powerful image to think about things just seeping through and then just saturating everything below it. The second thing that really happens is that we talked about communication, but the other piece of this is having mass layoffs and other things, right? When all of a sudden that hits, it is just so demoralizing. Even if you were one of the people that stays, in fact, most of the time, the people that stay have guilt complexes over it. And a lot of them suffer from this just for long periods of time. And the third thing that really happens during this process here that's really hard is that you have too much change at once, right? Between communication, between layoffs, and between too much change at once. Those, to me, I've found have been the biggest catalysts for these things occurring, and where you can really use that, ounce of prevention's worth a pound of cure, and getting ahead of it, because by the time it's happened, it's way too late.
Man, as I think about companies, I've seen this happen. You just laid out a script. It's like, okay, yeah, I had that. Had that. It was all three. It was a trifecta. So, I love even creating this analogy of the survivor syndrome of, because we bond with our team members. We bond with the people we work with. We're in the trenches with them. And so when there are these is a mass layoff because the company has to adapt to the market. I mean, the market we have to adapt. If we don't adapt to the market, the company's going to go down. So sometimes these layoffs, it's not just the leader being selfish and trying to get a new yacht. It's necessary for the market. But to connect that necessity down to the team member, they're just concerned about the relational level of the buddy that just left. And so that makes a whole lot of sense. And then too much change at once. Talk to me more about that. That's an interesting one. Because we have to change. We have to be an adaptable company. We want to be agile. Isn't that one of the catchwords? And so how can we be agile, and what does that lead to? Because what if you're an ADD leader, and how many CEOs have ADD and they're just like, shiny object. So talk to me more about this too much change.
Absolutely. So I'll give you a personal example from my playbook. So in 2018, I joined a new company and I was super excited, and I had given up. Actually, I went down in salary, and I went because I really wanted to be part of this. This organization was literally building itself from the ground up. It was in a bad position, and they needed people to come in like myself to rebuild the organization. And I loved doing that. And I was super excited. And so I joined because of this individual that hired me. And my very first day on the job, he wasn't there. I started on a Monday, and I had just quit this unbelievably great opportunity, and I was really excited. And all of a sudden I show up, and it was kind of like, oh, you work here now. Okay, cool. Here's your desk. Here's your office. Here's your team, and good luck. I was like, what? And towards the end of the day, he's like, oh, there you are. He comes into my office and he sits me down and he goes, look, I just want to give you a couple points here real quick. Today is my last day. The company is going to have the largest layoff it's ever had, and good luck. I'm going, what? Day one.
Yeah, mic drop.
Oh man, it was horrible. I mean, you want to see demoralization and just desperation in me. It was terrifying.
So when I think about that from a leadership level, the immediate thing that comes back to is thinking about the team member on the personal level. And that's so difficult to do, to really get down to that granular level, but it affects every change, every layoff, everything affects not the corporation as the whole, it affects the cells of the individual body as well. 100%.
That's a great analogy. If you think of a company as a body, right? Like, yes, you have your A, your T cells, you got everything else going on in there. And sometimes they have to take care of the waste, and that sucks, right? So how did I deal with this? Mm-hmm. So it was a very tough thing, because the biggest part for me was that was hard to deal with. But the other part was, now this team that had been led by this guy for 7 years has this new young kid coming in, and who the heck is this guy, right? So I not only have to prove myself, I have to explain to them that a few of them won't be coming back, and I have to be a leader to them all at once. So what I did was, the very first thing was, I ripped the Band-Aid off right away, and I told them everything that I knew. And I talked to HR first to make sure that I could, and I was able to. And then I said, you know what, let's talk about this for a second here, because this is what I've dealt with a lot, but I want to be open with you and tell you this was a shock to me too. And it's not something I'm looking forward to. And I'm going to rely on you guys to help me a lot. And what happened was, I didn't have the answers to everything, and I seemed human to them. And I approached them in a way that was very open and honest, and even showed vulnerability. And a few of them, not all of them, I will say about 10% of them, were still just like, who's this new guy? But I'd say close to 90% of people were on board right away and helped me. And they started realizing that I don't always have all the answers. And that part of the reason I have a team is that I don't have all the answers. I don't have all the skill sets that they do. And so I'm going to rely on them significantly to get through this. And what it did was, it was almost like that whole foxhole syndrome, where you guys go through a battle together, and you've been in a foxhole, and you come out and you're stronger, or hazing, or whatever other analogy you want to use. You go through hell to get to the other side. And this was one of those moments where, in 6 months, we built the most unbelievable team I've ever worked for. Profit in our division went up 75%. I actually ended up taking up a whole other division in the Northeast, and my career just blew up after that. And it was incredible.
Fantastic benefits from it. And I think if I rewind just a little bit, it's really because your tactic was the transparency, the authenticity, and really sharing what you were going through. But that was the answer to the actual problem, was addressing the disillusion, addressing that feeling of disillusionment, of the same things you were feeling, of, oh my gosh, what just happened? Just like, how do we deal with this shock and awe?
Yeah, it's exactly right. How do you deal with the shock and awe? Because at first I didn't have the answers, right? And what helped me was talking with my wife about it. And I'm like, oh, that felt great. I bet the team could use that,
I love that. So would you say even the tactic in this is being almost vulnerable enough to go, okay, what am I dealing with in this? How am I coping with it? And then how can I translate that also to my team? And that enabled you to absolutely explode.
Absolutely. And part of that is, like, one of the things I get trepidatious with here is that you don't just want to share feelings to share feelings as a leader.
Right.
You want to share feelings with an answer.
Ooh.
Right. And that's really important, because people get lost in that a lot. They'll propose things and say, I'm feeling this way. Well, all you did was scare someone or tell someone something, and there wasn't an outcome that was desired. And so when you're going through this process, it's great to be exposed in terms of your emotional rawness and relate to them on a human level. But there needs to be a conclusion for you at the end, where you learned a lesson. It's almost like the hero's journey. And you need to have that piece at the end. Otherwise, you're going to set them and yourself up for failure.
I love that, how you laid it out as the hero's journey, and just connecting. Because you're right, you can't just share any emotions, and because that can be just as, you can create more toxicity. Because your true emotions may even say negative things about the leadership, and that's going to have some really long-term implications as well. So this is so interesting. So Justin, I think we're on the right track. So after the commercial break, let's continue this process of how do we reconnect the dots of this disillusionment that comes from rapid change and even mass layoffs, these factors that affect the negative morale. And let's talk about how do we reconnect everything and create how you created the culture that creates dynamic. Is that the right word?
Dynamism.
Dynamism. Yeah, that word too. So after this commercial break, let's come back and let's connect all the dots and how do we make your business dynamite, just like Justin's was. Stick with us. All right, everybody, welcome back. We've still got Justin on the line. I cannot wait to hear more of how do we bring this together? If things get toxic, the company's going down. So how do we reverse the trend? How do we do the equal and opposite so that, because the reality is everyone goes through problems. Even if it's not the company transitioning or creating the problem, everyone deals with problems on a personal level. So how do we bring that positivity back? How do we bring that good morale back? So Justin, man, I know you got the answers to solve the world's problems. So let's do this because everybody's got this problem. Everyone's got a problem of some sort. Sometimes the company's dictating it. Sometimes it's just on the personal level that people go through divorce. People lose children. People get in car wrecks. People start having chronic pain. There's always problems that can affect an entire division, a department, if it's that key opinion maker even. So this is really a universal problem. So let's talk, how do you flip the switch to start making things positive again?
And that's a heavy topic, right?
Yeah, it is.
How do we climb out of the pit of despair? I feel like we're in a Disney movie here.
Yeah. So we've got the problem. How do we get out of the pit of despair?
Awesome. So one of the first things to do is that you got to be honest with yourself, right? Before you can even look outward, I always use the analogy of the airplane, right? If the plane, the first thing they tell you when you get on, they go through the safety briefing and they talk about the oxygen mask, right? You got to put oxygen on yourself first before you can help anyone else. And to a lot of people, when they first hear that message, they're kind of going, that seems selfish. Yeah, but if you're incapacitated, how are you going to be a resource for someone else? So it's not necessarily selfish. It's self-preservation so that you can do even better and have more of an impact. The same thing when you're going through a crisis of consciousness or change or whatever it is, the stress level that you're going through. One of the first things you have to do is not only acknowledge that you're going through this, but you have to find a way to deal with it. And that means a productive way, right? Whether, like for me, it's exercise and it's journaling and it's venting. That's what I do. Those are my big three go-tos. If I'm feeling stressed, I'll go out and I will just go run, or I will just ride my bike forever. And I'll just try to get that energy in a good space, because what I find is that movement as a whole is very cathartic and it's very soothing, because what you have to do in those moments is you've got to be present. You've got to be in those moments when you're doing exercise. Otherwise, you're going to hurt yourself and you're not going to get the benefit of it. So that's one of the first things that I do. The other thing I say when you're going through this and being honest with yourself is journaling is a great way to deal with this. And it's a very powerful tool that we don't utilize very much. And I'll give you an example from my perspective that I actually did this week with an individual. There's an individual that I coach on emotional intelligence, and he's trying to gain more of it. And one of the first things I had him do last week was write down kind of what he was feeling after some meetings that he had that were really critical. And what he found was that he was really honest with himself, and it opened up his aperture to see things differently. And he was like, wow, like it was like a stream of consciousness. And he went back and read it several times, and he came to me and was like, I kind of get it now. I understand kind of what I'm thinking about. I never thought about this before, because I'm just, like you mentioned ADD before, like I'm going from thing to thing to thing, and I'm not studying myself and I'm not looking at it from a different perspective. And so journaling is really, really helpful. The other thing that I think is very beneficial during these things is, once you've found kind of the core of what the issue is with you, is acknowledging that, right? Because the last thing you want to do is bury it. right? The last thing you want to do is just have this graveyard in your body of these just suck fest is what I call it. The graveyard of suck is what I call it. And basically what happens is at some point, those little, they get nervous energy, and they're going to pop out, and you're going to blow up, and you're going to have a bad experience with it. So you've got to release that pressure valve, and you've got to acknowledge it and not bury it.
So these are these are great key healthy things to help a person develop their natural coaching or their coping, excuse me. So if it's true there, then let's connect the dots. How do we make that happen on a corporate level? How do you do it?
Yeah, it's not as opaque, right? Because the first thing you want to do is you don't want to have a therapy session with your team because, one, you're probably not a qualified therapist. Two, you want to be a leader and you want to show resolution at the end. And so what we talked about before briefly was that you want to not just have problems, you want to have solutions. So the way to approach this is be honest with your team. If you're going through a hardship, tell them that, but then talk about the solution and then propose that the team works together on how they're going to navigate this. Because the other piece, that the fallacy of leadership is that everyone feels or thinks the way you do. And most of the time, if you've been in a leadership position, you realize very quickly, it's not. And what you really want to do is bring them in that process. Again, it's about communication and inclusivity when you're going through these things. And the way to do this is to sit down with your team and talk about, look, we're going through this change. We need to be stronger. We need to provide value. We need to be productive, and we need to be a leader in this organization, because that's what a good team does, is they act as inspiration for others, and they are people that people want to work with as well. So what you want to do is inspire your team in the regard that no matter what level you are in the organization, you not only have an impact, but your impact can be broader and more impactful, especially when you're going through troubled times.
Almost everything comes down to actually being a leader versus a manager, and inspiring that new direction. But if I was to broad stroke this, is it really, because you don't, like you said, you don't want it to go to the therapy level, but you do want to get them engaged in the actual problem and bringing them down to actually not fight or flight, running away from the problem or disengaging, or, worst case, becoming apathetic. But so is it that, like you mentioned before, helping them, giving them the authority to map their path forward?
Absolutely. Self-empowerment is very crucial to this process. The other thing here is acknowledging that there's no right answer here, possibly, that we're going to iterate. We're going to do, you mentioned it earlier about being agile. We're going to be agile in this. We may not make all the right decisions here, and that's okay, right? One of my favorite definitions of success is going from failure to failure and staying positive, right? That's awesome, because that's what success really is.
We use the word optimization. Remember, everyone, we're all, because I'm in marketing, it's all about optimization. Everything is a movement of refining towards the ultimate goal. And so that's our magic word is beyond being agile. Is, remember, we're all optimizing. If you don't like how it is now, let's just keep improving. We're all improving this together.
And that's awesome. And see, I mean, even when you say it, you smile and light up a little bit here, right? Like, optimizing has the opportunity to realize itself in multiple ways, right? So again, it opens your window to thinking of things like that you may not have thought of before. And the last thing I would say in this process here is you don't want to just diatribe, right? The best thing you can do is use real life examples. And so I'll give you one here. So during the process that I mentioned before, one of the first things we did was I said, look, I don't know how we're going to impact all these things, because part of the idea was one of my teams was a big portion was going to be laid off because the other side of my team was going to help automate a lot of the tasks that they were doing. So what I did was I sat down with them all and I said, look, there's actually an opportunity here, but I don't know what it is yet. So let's figure it out together. How, knowing this, that your job may not be here at the end of this, but we have to make a good product. How can we actually benefit each other in this process? And at first it was kind of like, oh, there's nothing we can do. And about 2 or 3 hours into this exercise, what we found was there was a lot of things we could do. And what we ended up creating was actually a whole new department based on those individuals that were going to lose their job. We created a whole new department that went in and actually trained others on how to optimize their role with automation coming on board. And it was one of the coolest transitions that I've personally ever done. And it was a really cool, empowering moment from the standpoint of it went from this dread to joy. And what ended up happening was it showed them the possibility of, if you are creative, if you are productive, and if you show value, you can be anything inside an organization. Because the organization, at the end of the day, what we forget about is they need people that are smart, that are creative, and that love to learn, and that are natural leaders. They always need that. Every organization on earth needs that. And if you come across that way, it's not a guarantee of a job, but what it is a guarantee of is that you will be successful over time.
And it's the leadership aspect is reminding them who they are, and reminding them, hey, this is what makes you great. And this is what wants to come out of you right now, based off this current stress moment. But remember, this is what made you great. My kids, one of the things that I'm continually remind my kids, this is who you always are. And so even when they're in these moments of stress and crisis, as I lead the team of my family, is I continually anchor them back to, remember, this is who you are. Yeah, it looks like this frustration's coming out, but this is who you always are. You're the person who's, like you said, creative, resilient. And those are the things that really make you great. Absolutely.
And the other thing I would iterate there on is because I think everything you said is absolutely right, is also reminding them that they've been through hardships before and come out the other side. The human condition is not perfect. You don't come out of the womb. I mean, there's never a baby that comes out and says, I'm here, right? Anyone that has kids, they're screaming, it's loud, they're confused, it's disruptive, it's terrifying, right? You come out of the womb scared. Mm-hmm. And yet you constantly, the only way we're able to survive is because we have other people around us, right? And we've got parents, everything like that. So part of this thing is not only are you an individual, but you have a place here, right? And making them secure in the sense that, yeah, your job may evolve. You may not always have a job here, but you're part of this team and you're a valued member. And this is how I see it fitting in.
Justin, thank you so much for this time. Just like I figured and like I knew from the beginning, you were going to add so much to this topic. Thank you so much for adding some value and bring us back to this human connection.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Todd. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely, buddy. All right, everybody. I hope this really tied a boat on things for you, that really the intentional movement is coming back to the human level of if morale is low, you're not connecting with your teammates. You're not connecting with the departments, the teams. You're not connecting on that authentic human level. Go down to the human level, and you're going to find the clues that lead you back to that great morale and that great company that you dream of. All right. We'll see you next time.
This has been a Now Media Networks feature presentation. All rights reserved.